Welcome to Rising Woman Leaders. I'm your host, Meredith Ram, and I believe the time has come for women to share their gifts, their voice, and their stories. I love seeing women spiritually and financially empowered, thriving in their life's work, and doing what they love every day. I've gathered a community of women living their dreams to tell us their stories and inspire us to step into more courage, self-love, and feminine leadership. If you like this podcast, follow me on Instagram at Rising Woman Leaders and sign up for email updates at risingwomanleaders.com. Now get cozy with a journal and a cup of tea. I hope you enjoy today's show. I'm here today with Ayana Young, who is a podcast and radio personality specializing in intersectional, environmental, and social justice, deep ecology, and land-based restoration. Young has a strong academic background at the intersections of ecology, culture, and spirituality. She was studying at Columbia when the Occupy Wall Street movement began, and amid the burgeoning resistance in Zuccotti Park, she co-created the Environmental Working Group. Post-graduation, dividends from her early career allowed Young to conserve 500 acres of coast redwood and salmon habitat in Northern California, where she's been living for over 5 years. Living for the first years in a tent with no electricity or running water while she established a homestead and broke ground on a native species nursery and research center, including the establishment of the 1 Million Redwoods project, which was acclaimed as the most backed farm project in Kickstarter history. Learning deeply from critical dialogue, she shared with over 100 guests on the For the Wild podcast, including Terry Tempest Williams and other thought leaders, including some of the brightest activists, political thinkers, and scientific minds of our time. Ayana approaches her mission with For the Wild with critical thinking and deep reverence. Thanks for being here, Ayana.
Thank you so much for having me, taking the time to speak today.
Yeah. You know, when I just was sitting with, like, kind of looking through the work that you've been doing, it's so much. Like, in just a couple years, I feel like there's been a lot that you've been able to create and share, and and at the same time, like, being on the land and creating this homestead. And maybe I'll just start with that. Like, what have the last few years been like? And like, just the fullness of everything you're creating, like what has that been like? And what's been your relationship to that? And just like contributing and giving back in such a big way.
Well, thank you for being curious about my inner world and the process that it's taken to be on this journey and do all these things. It's been full on for, I know in a sense it kind of feels like my whole life, but particularly with this work around creating the nursery site for the 1 Million Redwoods and the land protection here in Northern California and the podcast and other projects that I've done. It's really been sheer devotion, and a lot of really all of my vital energy has gone into this work. And people used to ask, well, how do you do so much? And I'm like, because I don't do anything else. And I used to kind of take pride in that. I used to feel in a way like I know that my life and my privilege has, in a way, of course, been a gift, and I'm grateful for it, but it also has contributed to the pain and the suffering of the world. And so I felt like it was my responsibility to give back and to work as hard as I have, in a sense, to try to be in as much reciprocity as I possibly could be. And at this point in my journey, I'm definitely taking another look at the way that I've been working and the type of high intensity, high productivity that I've been immersed in, and trying to see where I can slow down and where I can let joy and love and friendship back into my life, because it's been a really, I don't want to say it's a solo journey. It's been a little bit like a ascetic, or like maybe some people may kind of see it as like a monk life in the woods, where I've been in really deep study and I've been really isolated, except for when I go out and I do public speaking, which I've actually slowed down a lot on that as well. And so being in the woods, I really have had not a lot of distractions of city life or social life. Like, I have not had a social life. My social life, I wouldn't say I haven't had a social life. I haven't had a social life in the way that I used to. I used to live in New York City, and, you know, I would spend time running errands or going out or seeing friends or having dinner, where those things really faded away. And my devotion for the work was my number one priority. And my social life became one that I would socialize with trees and water and soil. And I would socialize with ideas that I was having or that I was receiving from the forest. And so, yeah, it's been really intense to start the nonprofit and keep up the weekly podcast and try to start a reforestation project that's going against the grain and rebelling against conventional forestry has been intense. And to do that in a place where I've really stripped myself of the creature comforts that I grew up with, like running water and electricity and just being dry and warm. In a way, it's been challenging, of course, but I have really craved that challenge because I wanted to get to the other side of my entitlement that I should just be able to have all these modern conveniences. And I wanted to really understand what it felt like to be cold when it was cold, and what kind of work it actually was to get water to a sink. And those things have humbled me. And I believe that in this time of climate chaos and mass extinction and so much global suffering, it's really important for those of us, especially who are privileged in dominant countries, to humble ourselves and really question our entitlement and question all of the things that we can have whenever we want to have them. Because I don't believe that those bring fulfillment. I think that they confuse us and keep us away from actually being in right relationship with the earth. So I could go in so many directions and continue talking about this really wonderful question you asked, but I'll kind of end it in just saying that it's been an intellectual journey. It's been a spiritual journey. It's been very emotional. I'm a very emotional person. And I feel like I have these dark nights of the soul often, where I go into really deep, dark contemplation. And I go to the forest with a lot of grief and a lot of confusion about where we are in the world. And I'm in that, I'd say, most of the time. And I just stick with it. I stay in the trouble of these times, and I don't give up. And I keep that devotion and that determination because it's fueled by my love for the earth. And that love allows me to do things that feel impossible.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, it's so true. Like, the energy of devotion can make us the things that we never could have imagined we could accomplish. It's just like when we're so in it. And I was talking recently with the woman that runs the center where I teach yoga, and she runs a whole Ayurveda center. And she, one of the things she said, which was stuck with me, was like, hard work is good for the soul. Like when we are devotionally, like, working hard towards something we believe in, that is like, there's so much we receive from that too. And I think a lot of people, especially with privilege, are suffering and experiencing depression right now because they don't necessarily have that, or it's like they don't have to be working as hard. And therefore it's like you can kind of sink into this, well, what am I doing with myself? Like this directionless place that can feel really depressing sometimes. So yeah. I just wanted to speak to that devotion energy. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you for asking.
Yeah. I'm curious too, just like, how did you start becoming interested in this work? I'm curious if there was any background with your family or just your upbringing or anything that like piqued your interest growing up that led you into this work that you're doing now.
Yeah, I think I was led into this work just based off being alive and being awake and being sensitive. And I think any of us could be led into this work if we say yes. And it would be our own version of this work, of course. I think that everybody has their unique, particular role to play within this movement towards being in right relationship with the earth. But for me, I didn't have an upbringing that was based in nature or in activism or in philanthropy or anything like that. So it was definitely not something that was really nurtured in me. But I feel like, well, I'd say it wasn't nurtured in me through my family or community systems, but I feel like it was nurtured in me probably from some type of more than human kin world or spiritual sense. Like, I feel like the ocean would tell me things, and maybe I couldn't understand them when I was younger, what exactly the ocean or the trees or the birds were trying to tell me. But I think that there were so many voices that were trying to bring me away from the consumer capitalist culture that I was completely immersed in growing up. And I remember having little moments of rebellion against my upbringing with watching Michael Moore documentaries or reading Adbusters or kind of just questioning everything. I was really somebody who questioned religion, questioned government systems. And it's not even that I really knew what I was questioning. I just had that little spiky sense inside myself that was questioning these things. And it wasn't until, well, yeah, I guess at some point in graduate school, I decided to study the environmental studies, basically. And I think I was led to that because I saw things like pollution and recycling, but I saw there was issues with recycling and trash and factory farms, but I didn't understand extreme resource extraction or indigenous sovereignty or really white supremacy's role in any of this. It just were things that would pop up and catch my attention, and it led me to question more and follow those threads of where does the truth lie, because I knew that I wasn't getting the full truth from the news or from school. I knew I wasn't really getting at what was actually happening. And it wasn't until I Occupy Wall Street that just things completely exploded in my mind and in my knowledge set of what was going down with the earth. And at that point, I couldn't turn back. It was like Pandora's box had opened, and there was no way that I was able to live the life that I was living before, because I had been exposed to such severe truths that I never even considered before. And from that point forward, it was just about finding ways of how to get involved, how to be more engaged, how to be more intimate with the issues, how to learn more, who to learn from. It's been an amazing journey of research and learning. And I'm really a very avid researcher. And it's something that drives me to pick up every stone and look underneath and really strive to find. It's not even that I'm looking for answers, because I don't really believe in answers or solutions, because to me those represent that there's an end to the inquiry. I don't think there's ends to the inquiry. I think that there's openings. And so, it's been a series of events and experiences and human relationships, and more than human relationships, that have led me to where I am now. And also, I'm still on the path, and I don't think I'll ever be off of it. This path of inquiry and truth seeking and reconciliation and reciprocity and consent building. And with the podcast that I host, every new week, every new show, I feel changed and shifted by, and new articles, and even just conversations with my friends who are also activists and otherwise continue to inspire me to keep digging deeper.
Thank you. Yeah. Could you speak a little more of the piece around like white supremacy and privilege, and just how you see that play out in ecology, and what kind of your eyes were open to at that time?
Oh, well, yeah. I think the environmental movement thus far, and I think it's getting a little better because the environmental movement has been challenged and really pressured to get more woke. But when I came into starting to care about things, it was more from an environmental standpoint, and a bit social, like poverty and issues like that. And growing up, there was probably some kind of knowing I had about white supremacy, but I probably, maybe I knew about like KKK or civil rights, things like that. But I didn't really understand how white supremacy was still playing out, how I was a part of it, and how it was directly related to ecological destruction, and how social justice and environmental justice are one and the same, and you can't have one without the other. Those things were, totally new to me 10 years ago when I first started really getting into the work more. And there's so many ways to understand it. I mean, statistically speaking, we could look at how incinerators or major resource extraction projects, whether that be oil drilling or fracking or mining or, dot, 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 on and on and on. Most of the time they're put in low income neighborhoods of people of color, or they're put on native reservations where they're kind of out of sight and out of mind of wealthier white neighborhoods. When we're looking at like cancer rates or diabetes or anything like that, any asthmas, things that are directly related to environmental degradation, again, communities of color statistically show higher rates of all of these diseases. So just on that level alone, we can just look to numbers and look to the science to see that this is a very real thing. And then, we can also think about how things are made, and where anything that I'm wearing on my body, anything that I have in my home, where did those raw materials come from? And who were the people who were actually digging those raw materials out of the earth? And whose water was polluted to make sure that I could have a pink shirt? It's like you could just really unravel this ball of yarn, so to speak, and just see how white supremacy has set up this system where people of color and the earth and their communities are sacrifice zones, and they're externalized factors. So it's as if like we can just kind of close our eyes and imagine that whole worlds have not been destroyed so that we can have And when I say we, I mean, whether it's we as, people who are upholding white supremacy, or we as in people who have privilege and dominant cultures. It's as if like we don't have to see all of the suffering that is causing other humans and more than humans in the earth to have what we want to have. And so ecologically speaking, if the communities on the ground and in the front lines are not taken care of, then they will not be able, and I don't mean taken care of like some savior has to come in and take care of them. I mean like even their ability to take care of themselves and not have to fight off poison. If those communities can't take care of themselves fully or aren't being taken care of by the culture, they're not going to be able to take care of the land that they are living around. So that's again like why social justice and environmental justice go so hand in hand. We can look around the world globally, and if people are, let's look at like countries outside of North America. If people are struggling and they're starving to death, or they're, so impoverished, they will have to extract from their own land in order to just survive. But that's also put in place by white supremacist, imperial, capitalist culture, because a lot of times, like, we could think about things like banana republics, like the United States or European countries will go into, say, the global South, and they will say, well, hey, this land that was your indigenous land actually is now our land, and your water that was your water is now our water, meaning these corporations, they own the land now, they own the water, and they will now dictate what happens on that land and water and what is grown there. And so people aren't able to live their life ways or grow their traditional foods or take care of their communities, because now they're basically indentured servants to global capitalism, so that people elsewhere can have what they want to have at any time of the year, like bananas. Like why are we eating bananas in North America in the winter, or at all for that matter? Like whose land is being used for those bananas that otherwise could be used for their traditional foods, and all the water that goes to that agriculture? I mean, it's a total wormhole, and we could literally break down almost everything in modern culture and see how it relates back to imperialism and white supremacy and capitalism and all of these things, because it's this crazy web that just continues to grow and grow and grow. But I'll pause there, because like it's really a wormhole that we could really get lost in.
Yeah. There's a lot, I think, that most of us are blind to. We weren't educated necessarily to think of things in this way. And I think, sharing the message on this is so important. Thank you for breaking that down. It makes a lot of sense and is something that can be uncomfortable, but something I think a lot of us, more of us, benefit from being aware of. So I also want to hear about, well, maybe just on this same topic, just how do you approach living a good life, or living a life in a way that feels like not just held down by just the shame of what has happened, like, or even just the grief of what's happening in the climate or to oppressed peoples. What thoughts do you have on that, on just living our lives in a way where we're not necessarily, where we're giving back, but also just working with the emotional side of things?
Yeah. Well, I'll start by saying, like, I do feel shame, and I do feel guilt, and I feel grief.
Mm-hmm.
And not that I think it's healthy for me or anybody to sit in that forever, or just be completely overwhelmed and debilitated by the shame and overwhelming grief. Because I think what that does is, like, if we sit in it for too long, then it becomes like this issue of self-absorption. And then it's like, wow, 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 I feel so much shame. I feel so much grief. I can't do anything. But it's like, me as a privileged person, if I let my shame overwhelm me, then I won't be able to give back, and I won't be able to be a steward, or I won't be able to actually help the systems that are suffering. And I don't want to say because of me, but I'm a part of the suffering. So I think that there's something where it's like, I do feel all those things, but I don't let them overtake me so that I can't be an engaged, reciprocal member of Earth community. And so I think it's important to remember that we do have to be active. And we also, I think, have to feel the realities of it. And there's some people that go, oh, like, don't, like, it's, if we talk about shame and grief and guilt all the time, like, nobody's going to want to join the movement. But then it's like, well, and there's parts of me that agree with that. I'm not the person, though, who's going to, like, sing the happy song and dance. I think there are other people who will do that. And I think like I said, everybody has their place, and everybody is going to be brought into the movement in a different way. But to me, that shame and that guilt and that grief is a form of acknowledgement, and it's a form of respect to the ones that are being oppressed. And that's not just the humans, that's also water, that's also orca, that's salmon, that's raven. You know, there's so many creatures that are being affected by our modern lifestyles and our modern relationships to the earth. And so if I'm not willing to feel shame because it's too hard for me to feel shame, I know that the other creatures are aware of that. And I know that the other creatures are aware when I am willing to say, you know what, like, I am a part of this, and I'm sorry, and I love you, and I'm sorry, and I'm trying, and I'm trying, and I'm trying to acknowledge what I'm doing and also change. And I think it's really similar to if we get in a fight with a lover or a friend or a family member. It's not always that, at least for me, it's not always that I want somebody to come in and fix it. But the first step is to acknowledge our role in what is happening. And so I think that acknowledgement on a spiritual level, on a relational level, to those who are being affected by our actions is completely mandatory to be in right relationship with the issues. And then I think for me to move through that, like, it's like I said, I do feel it a lot, and it's not something that will ever go away. And I don't want it to go away, because that's my connection to reality. And that's my connection to actually being a present, intimate person. But I feel the shame, and I feel the grief. And then I also feel gratitude, and I also feel the beauty of this earth. And I also feel the antidote of that grief being creativity. And so I'm able to go from the shame into creativity, into love, into devotion, into admiration, into reverence, into being in awe, into being grateful to be alive, and grateful that there are still trees that are standing tall, and that there are still gardens that can grow, and that there are still some orcas left in the oceans. And how do I bow to them? And how can I live my life in a type of prayer and bowing to these other beings that I am so in love with? And so that shame and grief and guilt actually, in a sense, are fuel for the love, to love more deeply, to love more intimately. And in so many ways, that's really what I want to do in my life beyond the projects. I mean, I love the projects, but the projects are just manifestations of the intimacy and the love that I feel for the earth. And so I think that it all comes together, and it all works together. And I think it is a constant practice of how to work within this yeah, it's a constant practice. And I definitely don't have a perfect way of like a perfect outline of like dealing with things or or like a way to say this is how you can never feel sad or something. But I think that I'm working through it every day.
Yeah. Yeah, I love what you shared just about the permission to feel it, and that it really shows as humans that we care and that we want to do better. Um, and also that piece around not wallowing in it, but actually using it as the fuel to take action. Mm-hmm. Could you tell us about your recent project, the Million Redwoods project, like what that is and what you've been creating there?
Sorry, would you remind us repeating the last part of
Oh,
the
sure.
question around the 1 million?
Yeah, just wondering what is the 1 Million Redwoods project and what you've been creating there or helping steward.
Oh, yes. Yes. Well, I've been working diligently on it this winter, which has felt really good. Working on it diligently with my hands, where before it was a lot more logistics and coordination, which is all part of it. Yeah, there's, as for those of us who run projects, we know that there's a million unseen pieces to get anything off the ground. And it's been an amazing journey of beauty and joy and excitement and frustration and confusion and then joy. And it's been really a roller coaster of how to stay in integrity when healing or trying to be a part of the healing of the forest. And the project really, it came out of my deep love for old growth temperate rainforest. And I spent a lot of time, and I continue to spend a lot of time in the forest. And when I noticed that so much old growth has been logged, actually only 2% of all, 2 to 4% of all old growth is left globally. So you can imagine, 96 to 98% of all old growth forests have been cut over the world. And I've spent time in old growth, but it's very hard to find. And so most of my time was being spent in post-logged forest, and whether those were monocropped with a singular species of a tree like Douglas fir or Sitka spruce or ponderosa pine, or clear cuts where trees had been completely stripped from the landscape, or forests that had grown back over a couple hundred years and were looking healthy again. I spent a lot of time in all these different forests, and I would go to the forest and I'd say, like, how can I help you? Like, what can I do? I see that you've been raped and pillaged, and I see that your biodiversity has been stripped. Like, how can I be a part of your healing? Not how can I save you, not how can I fix you, because I don't want to think that I don't want to like feed my little human ego that somehow I can do those things. And I think that's an important part of this project for me. And so in this line of questioning, there was a moment when I was at the confluence of these two waterways surrounded by alder and big leaf maple and redwood, and they told me to plant their children and to protect their homelands. And so that was about 6 or 7 years ago. And so I've been learning into what that means to grow their children, because at first I was thinking, oh, I'm going to have this big commercial nursery. And I started to build that. And when there's a few things that I put in place, like the ponds and some irrigation systems. And then as I was getting into the next phase of growing out the trees, then the question of like, well, where are the seeds coming from? And what kind of genetic diversity of not just redwoods, but the understory plants like the huckleberries and the Oregon grape and the seep monkey flower. And there's so many, many species that need tending. So there's a question of where are these seeds coming from and how genetically diverse are they from where you can source them from in the current model of reforestation. And then there's questions around, well, what kind of pots do we use? And I, was looking into what the typical kind of reforestation pot is being used, and they're quite expensive, and even new ones with UV protection only last 5 to 7 years. So I'm like, well, am I going to buy millions of pots that only last 5 to 7 years and go, and we kind of are learning that there really is not, recycling isn't a thing like many of us thought it was, and recycling isn't really happening in the same way that we were told it has been. And so I knew I didn't want to add more plastic into the waste stream, and also to think about, potting soil, perlite, peat moss. Peat moss is stripped from forest. Perlite is mined from the earth or lava rock. So I didn't want to be adding that in. And then also irrigating into black pots there's a major evaporation issue. So here I am like sitting in this whirlwind of going, well, I want to plant trees and understory plants and native fungi and build soil and build canopy and sequester carbon. But I also don't want to do harm while I'm trying to do good. And so this question of that balance, and also knowing that there's no way for me to not use fossil fuels at all. There's never going to be some purest way that nothing will be harmed in the process of doing a reforestation project or any type of restoration project for that matter. I think there's always going to be a give and take. But I have really been committed to searching for those truths, searching for the way that I can be in most integrity. And also that means, how do I work with human communities? Who are the indigenous peoples of these areas? And what do they have to say about reforestation? And what plants are important to them culturally? And all that takes a lot of time. And so it's not just a quick fix. It hasn't been a quick fix for me, and it hasn't been a fast project. And I imagine this project will take my entire life. And I'm grateful to be at the feet of this project and be serving it in this way. And although it's been frustrating, because in so many ways, the urgency and this fear of climate change and what's happening in this time has led me, and I know many other people, to feel like we want to make decisions, and we want to do things quickly because things are being destroyed so quickly. We want to restore so quickly. And I was really under that stress and anxiety of fast-paced decision-making. But I've had to rearrange how I go about it and say, what if part of the crisis is the way we respond to the crisis? And so I've had to question how I'm doing reforestation in that way, and slow down and realize it's going to take time to build relationships with human communities and trust and consent. It's going to take time to build relationships and trust and consent with the plants, with the genetics, with the soils, with being able to have a living library of native species that will hopefully in a way be a Noah's Ark as we go deeper into climate chaos, but to be able to create it in a way that feels like it has the most integrity it can have at this time. And so it's a beautiful project. I feel so excited at this moment because I've been, in research development for the last 5-6 years, and there have been a lot of tireless moments. But right now it's at a very fun stage because I'm going out and I'm collecting different species and I'm propagating those species in the nursery. And I'm creating a type of living library arboretum right now of these different temperate rainforest species. And so it's been so revitalizing to be working with the plants themselves, because the plants have so much to give and offer and share with us. And I know that when I tend the plants and the fungi and the soil, what I get back in terms of fulfillment and joy and love is immense. And so I'm really in an exciting place right now where I get to be with the plants directly.
Yeah, when I think about that and just how much you're working with the earth and with the plants, I'm curious, like, what's one of the deepest lessons you've learned from them? Or even maybe one of the more recent ones, whichever feels more relevant.
Which one of what feels more relevant?
Oh, if what are some of the deepest lessons you've learned from the earth or from the plants?
Oh, hmm. Hmm. I think some of the deepest lessons I've learned is to get out of my own way and not be so um, wrapped up in my own self, in my own little world, but that there are worlds upon worlds that exist. And it is so much more fruitful to give myself to those worlds and to not spend too much of my time in my own self-absorption. And the plants always bring me back to that. They're always like, get out of your head, like get out of your own story or your own narrative of what's going wrong or why things aren't good enough or why you're not fulfilled or
Mm.
any of that kind of mind jumble. The plants are like, look at us living, breathing. Look at us in our beauty and our glory. Look at our greenery. Look at our colors. Smell us, touch us, be with us, lay with us. And there's so much community and really, to me, like a family ties when it comes to plants. So they really bring me out of that human supremacist mindset, and I'm always so grateful for that. And I feel like I need a dose of anti-human supremacy every day just to just to be in a world that isn't of in a way like my own creation in my mind. And I'd say part of that, being with the plants and being in reverence with the plants, is a type of slowing down, and it's a type of prioritizing. Really asking. They really ask me, like, what do I prioritize, and what am I going to choose to spend time with or on? And life is short, and I think that those people, human and non-human, in our lives who can help us focus back on what is truly important feels really mandatory. So yeah, I owe so much to the plants. I owe really everything I'm doing, every project I'm working on, every day of my life, all my inspiration. It all comes from them.
Mm. Yeah, it's so beautiful. It's just getting ourselves out of that, like just me, and thinking that, getting so caught in our heads. I think the plants are really helpful with that. They're so
Yeah.
communal and just like bringing us out of ourselves. um, what other current projects are you working on, and like how can people get involved?
Mm-hmm. Well, so there's the weekly podcast, there's the 1 Million Redwoods project that we've gone over. And then I'm also going to be working on a major conservation project in Alaska this summer. I've been working on it for the last few years, but I'm going back up, and we're going to be doing a big fundraising campaign to protect this incredible delta, the Copper River Delta, that is so wild and vast. And there's 11,000 acres of mountains within this delta system that is up for coal mining, which would look like a type of mountaintop removal. So they would dynamite the tops of these mountains and add toxic chemicals to the process, and it would just seep into these glacial fed river delta systems where there's moose and salmon and grizzly and black bear, and it's an incredible place. And so I will be doing a big media fundraising campaign because we're looking to raise somewhere between $10 and $20 million. So it's going to be quite a big one. I've never tried to raise anywhere near that kind of money before. So in terms of that project, when people see that coming up at the end of 2020, please share and invest in protecting this place with me. But otherwise, people before that, if people listen to the podcast and they feel like it's something valuable in their life, becoming a member on Patreon or donating through the website, where you can also donate to the 1 Million Redwoods Project in a tax-deductible way, is so important. Like, we can't do this work without community's financial support. We have a team of people who work tirelessly, and they need to be compensated as they should be so that they can pay their rent and put food on the table to do this work that is helping all of us. And then in terms of finding us, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter. We have a newsletter that you can sign up for on our website at forthewild.world. And also, you can always email us at connect@forthewild.world. And we always get back to everybody who emails in, whether it's a thought, a question, just wanting to say hello. If you want to be a part of the project, we have different job opportunities open up from time to time. So yeah, I would say join the community in whatever way it makes sense for y'all who are listening. And we're always wanting to really connect with more people. And in so many ways, For the Wild is really about being a place for people to connect deeply to each other and kind of quench that loneliness that comes with the knowledge of what's happening in this time.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah. Do you have any last closing words, anything you'd like to leave our listeners with today, before I close this with a short prayer?
Let's think about that. Any last? Well, I want to say I know I dropped some heaviness into this conversation. And so for those who are feeling that weight, I think we can take that grief and that weightiness that we can feel when we start to think about the unraveling of our earth. And I think it's important to go and touch the earth when we're feeling that type of pain, and to, whether that's taking our shoes off, putting our feet on the ground, or hugging a tree, whether you live in the forest or whether you live in the city, find a bush, find a plant, find a tree, find soil, find a fur animal you can cuddle with. I mean, there are so many allies that are all around us who are waiting for us to wake up, and who are waiting for us to give them our attention. And so I want to say that, yeah, we can take the grief and we can hold that grief in love with our more than human world allies, our more than human allies. And we don't have to do this alone. And that also everybody is needed. The earth really needs every single person to be in their full aliveness, in their full expression of their offerings to a more beautiful world. And that can look like frontline defense, or you're strapping your body to a gate to stop a pipeline. That could look like cooking for the people who are doing that. That could look like being a healer for the people who are on the front line. That could look like going to your city hall meeting and stopping pesticides from being sprayed in the local playground. That could look like creating graphics for protests. I mean, it's like the opportunities are endless to be involved. And so I want to say that, yeah, if you're feeling the grief, take it to the land and be with them. And it's amazing how much life, I think, will be breathed in anybody who wants to do that, and to also say that, we're all necessary in this movement. And in those times where we feel like we can't do anything right and we can't do anything where we're not harming something because everything is so effed up. And I know I feel that a lot. I think we just have to keep going, and we keep having to push through it. And it's not supposed to be easy. Like, we're not supposed to be able to easily figure this out. We have to get out of that mentality that we can think it's going to be simple, or we can, if we just give ourselves to it for a few months, we can get to the other side. This is a lifelong commitment. It's like we have married the earth, and a marriage is hard and it's challenging. And there's going to be times where we got to communicate and get frustrated and cry and make love and cry and get angry and make love. And like, that's just going to be it. And so I think if we can commit and get ourselves in the mind frame that we know it's going to be a roller coaster, but we're down and we're strapped in and we're not going anywhere, and we can do it together, I think we will all feel so fulfilled by the time we take our last breath, because we know that we gave ourselves to this earth. And I don't think there's anything more beautiful than that.
Thank you. Yes, let's just breathe that in. Just take that, all of these words, this wisdom, this gratitude, this love, filling our heart, allowing the emotions to be fuel, to activate, and to create shift in just our own relationships with the land and how we live our lives, but also in the bigger and the global scale of how we can give back and contribute with our time, with our resources, with our energy. Deep bow to you, Ayana, for doing this work and for bringing your wisdom to us today. Thank you so much. And to everyone listening too. Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, and to everyone listening too, just sending you all off with lots of love. Namaste. Thanks so much for taking the time to listen to our show today. We would love to hear what you think. Take a moment to hop on over to iTunes and leave us a review. We'd be so grateful to receive it. Until next time, namaste.